Welcome to Retire Mentorship. My name is Freeman Lindy. I'm a certified financial planner and tax advisor. I help folks over 55 retire successfully and stay successfully retired. And I get a lot of questions both on this show, which airs every week, 4 p.m. Central on the YouTube channel here. Just get questions that we get emailed to us, questions at retirementorship.com. You can always throw questions in the chat as well. And then people ask me questions live in meetings and all those other kind of things. So we're just bringing to you today a couple of questions that I get frequently. And the first one is, should I pay off my mortgage before I retire? Should I pay off my mortgage? And like a lot of people think about this, right? They've got a mortgage. Maybe they're not quite scheduled to pay it off before their retirement date. And they're wondering, hey, should I accelerate this? Should I pay this off faster? And do I need to have this paid off before I retire? Or is it okay to retire and carry a mortgage payment into it? So again, the way that I'm going to think about this is, first of all, can you cash flow it in retirement, right? And so if we think about a couple different things, right? If we've got your timeline, right? Everything we do is in timelines. And let's say you're going to retire at this point here. Here's your retirement date, right? We might say, hey, here's all your expenses, right? This is how much we're living on, right? Red is going to be your expenses. And blue, especially, this actually happens in our software as well. Blue might be your total income over that time. So you probably are earning more income while you're retired than while you're working, because this difference here, right? You are saving this into 401ks, etc. You are living on less than you make, right? But then when you retire, right? When we cross this line here, your income, there's no reason for your income to be above your expenses, right? Because you're gonna have a couple of things, like maybe you have Social Security in there, maybe if you're married, you've got another Social Security, and then whatever, if your expenses are still the same, right? Whatever this difference is here, this you're gonna have to make up for in what we call target portfolio income, right? Withdrawals from your retirement accounts, from your IRAs, from your Roths, etc. And so you just need to make up this amount every year just to get up to what you want to spend, right? And so if part of this line here is mortgage payment, right? And so you still have all of this now, then you could say, well, hey, can my Social Securities plus any pension maybe that's in there, plus our target portfolio income, is that enough to still pay this amount of expenses in retirement? Or are we only going to be able to get up to this amount here, minus mortgage? Right. Well, in that case, we want to make sure that your mortgage is paid off before retirement, because then you're going to have a lower expenses overall. And if your Social Security is the same, well, hey, and we only need to pull out, X amount from our portfolio instead of Y amount, then it's going to be much easier to retire, right? The amount you have in your portfolio is going to be required to be a lot less. And so that's easy enough to do. So you kind of want to back it in and say, hey, well, I have the cash flow, well, I have the target portfolio income to pay this payment in retirement. And sometimes, right, it's like, well, hey, I'm going to for a while, and this amount here, right, is an unsustainable withdrawal rate. I'm not going to be able to do that for 30 years, but I won't have to, because my mortgage is going to be paid off in year 7. And at that point, if we then lower it to the new amount here, will we have enough to cover that for life? And again, you can calculate all those things, or good planning software like what we use can do that fairly easily with all the different tax ramifications and investment ramifications and all that. And we can find out, hey, are we able to do that? And so first, you're going to want to just answer that, cash flow question. Can we do that? Here's the other thing though, right? We would want to answer the tax planning question, right? Because if you have a mortgage, let's say your mortgage is going to take out to here normally, right? But so two things, right? If we're spending this and we're trying to pay this off earlier, well, then we need to increase our payments so we can pay it off earlier, right? Which is going to decrease your savings, right? And so that's going to do a few things. One, that's going to affect how much of your total income here is taxable, because if you're doing traditional 401k contributions, those are pulling down your taxable income. And so if you're doing less of those to pay off your mortgage faster, you will have more taxes, right? We also want to look at, hey, what are your taxes now before you retire? And what are your taxes going to be after you retire, right? After we cross this line. Now we're going to be in different brackets, right? For some of you, you actually want your expenses to go up because you're planning to do some go year stuff, then some slow go year stuff, and then eventually some no go year stuff down the road, right? And so both on the cash flow and the tax perspective, where are we going to be? How much taxes are we going to need if paying off this mortgage and keeping our expenses here or way up here is going to have us pay more in taxes or less in taxes. We're going to want to incorporate that into how much of our income should we be throwing at the mortgage versus how much should we just be continuing to save and paying the bare minimum on all that up to retirement. So that's another ramification that you would want to look at if you want a really good answer, right? Again, if you came here for a 30-second answer, you came to the wrong show. And so those are things that we're going to want to look at for both the tax planning and the cash flow aspects of should we pay that off. And again, if you had questions, stuff that you want to ask specifically about this or I haven't covered yet, you can throw those in the chat and we can always add to our answers just in things that you are asking in the live show. And if you watch this after the fact, still give us a comment, ask questions. We can address those in a future show. The other thing that we want to look at with all this stuff is kind of your rate of return versus your interest, right? What are you paying on mortgage interest and what are you otherwise making if you're doing that, right? Because if you're paying more on your payment on your mortgage, you have less to invest. And are we making more, right? So for some of us, you've got like a 2.8% COVID mortgage, right? You refinanced back in 2020, 2021, when rates were real low and you've got a really low mortgage, right? So if this is your mortgage interest, right, and your money market account, so taking no risk, right, putting in just a good Schwab money market fund in your brokerage account, right? If that's paying 3.8% or whatever it's paying now, right, you are literally making more money on cash sitting there than you are paying an interest on your bank. And so you don't even have to invest it to save the difference, but you can ultimately make more not paying it down faster, right? And certainly if you invested it in a good old, equity portfolio, you can make a lot more than that, right? 10% on average. Doesn't always do 10, but you can make more, obviously, investing versus paying it down. Now, if you don't have a good retirement income strategy, then you should read this. But if you don't have one, you might not be making 10%. You may be making 4 or 5% in your retirement savings. And instead, if you are paying not 2.8, but you're paying 6.5% or 5% in mortgage interest, well, then we're probably better off paying this off. Because if you might make 6.5 and you're you got a good old-fashioned portfolio here and you're 50% fixed income and you are 50% equities, and so your average rate might only be 6.5%. Well, I would rather pay off the guaranteed 6.5% rate you're paying on your interest than the maybe 6.5 you'll get investing, right? But there is a strategy that I like to teach people that if we're saying, hey, we've decided after we calculated the cash flow and the taxes and all that, right? We've decided we do want to pay it off. What's the most effective way to pay off our mortgage? And the most effective way to pay off your mortgage is not to pay extra payments on the mortgage, right? That's the easiest way, but it's not the most effective. Because again, we got to separate the goal from the means, right? From the tactics of getting there. The goal is not to pay extra payments on your mortgage. The goal is to have 100% equity in your house, to have no more mortgage, to have it paid off, right? The goal is to pay off your mortgage, not to pay extra on it. We pay extra on it as a means to that end, right? As a tactic to achieve the goal, right? And so the goal isn't to pay more on our mortgage. The goal is to pay off our mortgage. And there's a better way to do that. And I call it the equity escalator. So, and I don't know if I can trademark that. I should, because it's a sweet idea and it has a double meaning. So one, we obviously want to pay off our mortgage because we're increasing the equity or the ownership in our home. And the way we're going to do that is by investing in equities, right? And so the idea is that let's say you're paying 5% on your mortgage, right? And your normal mortgage payment is $1,500 a month, or that's the amount that's going to principal and interest. And so you're paying that every month, trying to pay that down, and you have an extra $1,000 a month in budget that you could put towards that, right? Well, you can just throw that into the mortgage if you want and pay that down faster and be done with your mortgage sooner. That's definitely an option. The other way you can do it is you can invest in the market, right? Because again, we always talk about, S&P 500 averages 10% per year, right? S&P 500, right? Averages that. Or over long periods of time, the S&P 500 average 8 to 12% a year. Okay, but almost never does that. right? 4 times in the last 100 years has the S&P actually gotten between 8 and 12% calendar year returns. Okay, so it never does that, and I think that's where people get leery. Like, well, hey, yeah, you might make more than your 6% mortgage, but there's no guarantee. It might be a bad part of time, and so you should just pay down your mortgage, right? And if you're like, well, hey, I for sure need this amount of money by this date, then equity investing is not great for you because there's no way to guarantee you're going to have X amount of money by X date. But you'll have around that much money around that date. So if you can be flexible with it, then it's a great strategy. So if you think about it, right? If the market does something like this over the next however many years, right? And your interest is accruing like this, right? So you got, it starts here, right? So the difference between we have this amount in interest or potentially this amount in equity growth, right? Well, obviously this would be better, but the difference between this and this would be worse. You'd be better off paying your interest than paying or investing in equities if you take it out in the middle of a downturn. But we don't sell in the middle of a downturn, right? We keep invested. So the way that the equity escalator works is instead of just making extra payments every month against this interest to pay down this interest faster, we instead throw money in every single month or every 2 weeks or whenever you're doing it into the market, right? When the market's going up, you're actually not making that much money on this money you're throwing at the top because it just isn't in there long enough and you haven't made that money yet. But when, not if, the market goes down, you're still throwing money in there and you're buying on sale all the way through all this stuff, right? And you keep buying and buying and buying. And what you would do is you would say, well, hey, we're going to keep throwing money in here. We're going to buy on sale when it's 20% down, 25% down, etc. And yes, this averages 10, right? But this could average 25, could average 50%, depending on when you get it, right? And so you can, if you're paying 6 over here versus sometimes getting 25 to 50% interest over the course of a year, right? That's way better. And so, yes, as the market's going up, you're still investing. And then when it goes down, this is where you really win. And so you'd invest all the way through here. And then eventually sometime, maybe it's here, maybe it's here, maybe it's here, somewhere when it's high, you would then, as soon as this gap here is more than your entire mortgage, you would sell out and pay off your mortgage all at once. So instead of contributing like $1,000 a month to the mortgage, you would invest that instead and then pay plus a lump sum. Then you pay that mortgage off when the lump sum that you have invested is more than the mortgage balance you have left over, right? And if the market's been going up for a long time and you're like, hey, it's not quite there, I got $70,000 left in my mortgage and my balance is worth 60, but the market's been doing really, really well, and I'm afraid it's going to tank off. Cash out at 60 and pay down $60,000 towards your mortgage all at once. You'll still be ahead overall than paying systematic payments towards your mortgage, right? And you can often do this, right? You can say, hey, maybe I've got my normal brokerage account or Roths or whatever else. I'm going to have a separate, equity escalator account. And so I'm going to have this, and then I've also got my mortgage. And I'm always, whenever I look at the mortgage, just to help myself think about this, right? I'm going to say, hey, whatever I have in my mortgage minus what I have in my equity escalator account, that's my net mortgage. And so in that way, you can kind of see that, hey, yeah, I still see I have 100 grand on here, but I have 50 grand over here. So really, I only have 50 grand left on my mortgage, right? And the reason you call it an equity escalator is because you want to think about it like you are taking the escalator, but you are walking up the escalator. I don't know if you've ever done that in an airport, right? I do it all the time. I take the escalator, but I still walk up it. And some people hate me, but that's what I do. Because you are still putting in the effort, right? You are still walking up the stairs. You are still saving the $1,000 a month into here all the time. You still have to do stuff, right? But then the market is also accelerating, right? If you're walking up an escalator, you are going faster than walking up the stairs. So the market is accelerating your pay down and doing a bunch of that work for you, right? And then equity, because you're using equities to build the equity in your house and changing ownership from one to the other. And so if you do that, you can actually pay it off faster. And to show you what I mean here, put together a little spreadsheet. We'll hit this real fast here. So this is our equity escalator spreadsheet, real fast. Let me just explain this. And I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but if you've got $140,000 left on your mortgage, your principal and interest payment's $1,500, you're paying extra $1,000, right? Here's your 3% interest rate. Here's your standard table, amortization table. You pay it off over 5 years. It's basically when that pays off, right? If instead we took the last 5 years and I took just the Vanguard S&P 500 mutual fund, I took the open and closing rates over the last 5 years from January of 21 through December of 25, and plus the dividends I get invested in there, right? So if instead you said, hey, back in January of 21, I'm going to take that extra $1,000 and it allows me to buy 2.9 shares of the S&P 500 fund. And so every year I'm going to buy more shares, right? When the market's high, I buy less shares. And when the market's low, I can buy more shares for the same $1,000. But it's all pretty close. And all that market value grows, right? The market over that time, I think I've got a little chart down here somewhere. Here it is. Right, market over that time went out for 2001. We had the 2022 crash, kind of recovered over 2023. 2024 is up, 2025 is up, right? And so it kind of does its thing. And so the way that works then, right, is after all this, you have all this stuff, and at some point, about 4 years and 4 months into it, you have enough where you've put $55,000 into your equity escalator account. It's now worth 75, and you've got $20,000 in gains, right? And so you sell all that. So we got down here, you sell your S&P 500, you pay some capital gains taxes on that, right? So you're going to pay $3,000 in taxes. And you had about $73,000 in that, plus your payment for that month, plus the amount we got out of our account, pays off your mortgage 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months early, which doesn't seem like a ton, right? You're like, okay, big whoop, it's 5 months early. But that's 5 months of the $1,500 in payments you were making anyway, plus the $1,000 in extra payments that you were making over here. Right, so overall, you save just about $14,000 in this scenario if you had done this over the last 5 years. Now, again, $14,000 is not going to make you independently wealthy, but you're spending the money anyway, right? You're either putting money down into your 401 or directly onto your mortgage payment, or you're putting it aside to make more than that. Either way, that money's going out. And if you can get 14 grand more out of your money over 5 years, that's 3 grand a year. Just by changing how you do things, taking 10 minutes to set up an account, taking 30 minutes to do the whole thing, and you end up with 15 grand 5 years later for an hour's worth of work. Isn't that worth it? You're like, I don't know. I don't know if I understand this well enough to do it. Okay, well, then I also threw what if you just did it with your advisor, and let's say they're charging the 1% proverbial fee to do nothing but put this in the S&P 500 for you and make sure you do it, right? Okay, well, you're going to pay them $1,400 in fees to save you 14 grand in interest and make you and gains. So it's a 10x return to do nothing and have someone else do it for you, and you get a 10x on that money in this scenario, right? Might as well. Right now, again, we don't know what the returns are going to be in the future. If you're doing this for a long time, then one of the things you can do, let's switch back over to my chart here, right? If you're doing this over a long period of time, then what you do is every time it goes high, you sell here. And then if the market is at an all-time high, kind of like it is right now, maybe you wouldn't really be doing it. But anytime the market is down, you switch from putting extra in your mortgage to buying low all the way through here. And then whenever it's high, you sell it all and throw it in the mortgage. And then you could only do it during the downturns. That's another way to do it. It requires more work. That's certainly one way you can do it. Either way, there's just how do you get a little bit more money out of your money? That's what good financial planning is for. That's what people who know what they're doing can help you with if you don't want to do it. And just one of the many ways that a good fiduciary fee-only financial planner can help you maximize your money and optimize it across your life. So if you want to know more about the taxes and how the tax impact of paying off your mortgage or not works, our new book, Tax Saving Strategies, is coming out in 2 weeks. And so we wanted to grab that. If you want to know more about retirement income and target portfolio income and how to make sure you pay for that in retirement, then you can also get a copy of 3D Retirement Income when you pre-order. So make sure you do that as well. Okay, let's take one more question. So that was a question we had from someone, and I think we got one more for today as well. So Dawn had asked, do I need to pay an inheritance tax? She had more context, and I think she's expecting to receive something from her dad, who's older. Let me get some more paper here. There we go. And is wondering, do I need to be worried about inheritance taxes? So a couple things. You have inheritance tax, and you have estate tax. Right? Inheritance tax is taxes that you, as the beneficiary, you would pay those. Estate taxes are taxes that the person leaving, so the deceased, are taxes they would pay, right? So there is a federal estate tax, right? So just so we're not confusing these, because some people confuse these two things. There is a federal estate tax if you have more than 15 million per person, which means it's $30 million if you're a couple. Then you would have to pay estate taxes on the amount over that. Right, so if you have 40 million, then you would have to pay estate taxes on 10. But that is paid by your parents before they die. Or if you're worried about it, that would be paid by you before your kids get it, right? Inheritance tax is paid by the beneficiary. It's like, hey, I've received this money. Do I need to pay taxes on it? And the short answer is not usually. There's no federal inheritance tax. So there's a federal estate tax, but you have to have a ton of money for that to matter. And there is no federal inheritance tax, okay? So, is there Fed? There's no Fed on this one, right? But then there's also states. So there could be a potential state estate tax and a state inheritance tax, right? And this varies widely by state. So I'll actually show. Let me cue this up here. Let's stop sharing that one, and then we'll share screen and window. So just like Tax Foundation puts this out every year. Not sure if there we go. So 2025 data, right? So these states have either an estate tax, an inheritance tax in yellow, or both. Maryland is the only one with both, where they're going to tax the person who dies and the person who receives it, right? All the other states, you don't have to worry about that at all, right? I live in Wisconsin, or work in Wisconsin, live in Minnesota. And so there's nothing here, right? Nothing in Florida, nothing in a bunch of these states. But the other thing to think about, right, is the exemption in these other states like Minnesota. So I live in Minnesota currently, born and raised there. New York, some of these other states, right? The amount that they tax it on can be all over the place. So the estate tax exemption, how much you're getting taxed on the amount over that, is $3 million in Minnesota, which may be plenty for you and nothing you need to worry about, but it's way less than the $30 million for a couple at the federal level, right? Some are as low as $1 million. I think that's the lowest, right? So some else have other ones, but they're still, pretty high. And then some people have an inheritance tax, right? Which isn't that much. And Kentucky has one. The exemption is only $1,000, and you basically pay it on the whole amount. And then the rates are anywhere from 0 to 16%, right? So this can be helpful if you live in any of these states. Then it would be helpful to know what you're going to pay. And so you can plan that in, and again, use some tax saving strategies to help with that. So the short answer is almost certainly no. It wasn't for Dawn. Dawn will not pay any inheritance tax because she lives in Wisconsin, and there's not enough of an estate to pay any estate taxes to. There are a bunch of other taxes that you could pay, right? Whether it's from brokerage accounts, like with step up in basis or inherited IRAs, and we cover all that again in tax saving strategies. So if you are leaving inherited IRAs or IRAs to your children, Roth IRAs, brokerage accounts, or you're going to be inheriting, then the strategies in here are really going to help you minimize those taxes so that you can have more for you and your loved ones. You can get it absolutely for free. That's all we have for today. We hope that was helpful for you. We'll see you next week. Cheers.